guys, welcome back to my video. In this video we will try to solve a quadratic equation, simple quadratic equation by factorizing. So the first example would be x squared plus 5x plus 4 equal to 0. Here the first thing you have to check is the coefficient of x squared. Is it 1? If it's 1, then you can follow. Here, let's check. The coefficient is 1, so we can use this method. In this method, this is practice time, so for theory you can refer to my other videos. We are looking for two numbers which if we add them together it would be equal to 5, and then if we multiply them it would be 4. So the two numbers would be 1 and 4. As you can see, if we add them together, it would be 5, and if we multiply them, it would be 4. So I will factorize the equation as x plus 1 multiplied by x plus 4 equal to 0. And as you can remember, if two expressions, a times b, are multiplied by one another and the answer is 0, then that means either a is 0 or b is 0. So that means either the first parenthesis or the second parenthesis is 0. So we can say either x plus 1 is 0 or x plus 4 is 0. From here, we add negative 1 to both sides, so the x is negative 1. From here, we add negative 4 to both sides, and x would be negative 4. And the two final roots for this quadratic equation are negative 1 and negative 4. The next example would be x squared plus 7x plus 10 equal to 0. First thing first, we have to check the coefficient of x squared. Is it 1? Yes, so checked. Now we are looking again for two numbers which we add them it would be 7, and if we multiply them it would be 10. And I believe the two numbers would be a match. For this one would be 5 and 2. If we add them it will be 7, multiply them would be 10. So this this equation would be factorized into x plus 2 multiplied by x plus 5. Again, a times b is equal to 0. That means either a is 0 or b is 0. Okay, so from here, x plus 2 is 0, so I added a negative 2 to both sides to get rid of the plus 2 and isolate the x. So the final answer would be negative 2. In the second one, I add negative 5 to both sides to isolate the x, and the final answer would be x equal negative 5. Third example, x squared plus 7x minus 18 equal to 0. First thing first, we check the coefficient of x squared. It's 1, so it's checked. We can use this formula or this method. So we are looking for two numbers which we add them together it would be 7. We multiply them together it would be negative 18. So the two numbers, I believe the best two numbers would be 9 and negative 2, because here if I add them, the bigger number is 9, is a positive sign, so it will add up to 7. But if I multiply the same two numbers, it will be negative 18. So now this will be factorized into x plus 9 times x minus 2 equal to 0. So again, once more, a times b is equal to 0. That means either a is 0 or b is 0. Here, this is a simple linear equation. I add negative 9 to both sides, so x would be negative 9. In the second one, I add plus 2 to both sides to isolate the x, and x would be plus 2. So the final answers actually, or the roots for this quadratic equation would be negative 9 and 2. And let me just show you something. Let's say if x equal to is a root, then that means if you substitute it back, the answer should be 0. So let's try it. So we substitute the x as 2 in the original equation. So let me just put it here. So that would be 2 to the power 2 plus 7 times 2 minus 18. That would be 4 plus 14 minus 18. As you can see, the answer is 0, so that means you got the correct root. And I always advise you to check back your answer and make sure, substitute it back and make sure you got the right answer. The fourth equation, it would be x squared minus 7x plus 10. First thing you have to check is the coefficient of x squared. It's 1. Perfect. So I can use this method. Here, I'm looking for two numbers, which I add them together. It would be negative 7. If I multiply them, it would be plus 10. Okay, so the two numbers would be, I would say 5 and 2, 5 and 2. But let's see what are the sign. So I want them to be negative 7, so both of them would be negative. And if I multiply them, the two negative would act on another and it would be positive. So it will turn into x minus 5 multiplied by x minus 2 equals to 0. A times b is equal to 0. So either a is 0 or b is 0. From here, you have two simple linear equations. You add plus 5 to both sides of this linear equation to isolate the x. So x would be 5. In the second one, you add plus 2 to both sides of the second linear equation to isolate the x. And the final value for x would be 2. So once more, the roots for this quadratic equation are 2 and 5. Okay, let's check the answer. Here, I will substitute x equals 5 in the equation and make sure it will satisfy the equation. So 5 to the power 2, it's 25, minus 7 times 5 plus 10 should be equal to 0. Let's see if that's the case. So 25 minus 35 plus 10. So that would be negative 10 plus 10, it's 0. So that means we are on the right track and the roots are correct. Example 5, x squared minus x minus 30 equal to 0. Let's check the coefficient of x squared. It's 1. So that means we are on the right track. We can use this method. We are looking for two numbers. If we add them, we get negative 1. If we multiply them, we get negative 30. So I would go with 6 and 5. 6 and 5, but let's see what are the signs. So it should be added to negative 1. So I go with negative 6 and 5. So this will be factorized into x minus 6 multiplied by x plus 5 equal to 0. Again, a times b is equal to 0. That means either a is 0 or b is 0. So if a is 0, x minus 6 should be equal to 0. This is a linear equation. In order to isolate the x, I add plus 6 to both sides. So x would be 6. For the second one, x plus 5 equal to 0. If I want to isolate the x, I had to add negative 5 to both sides to get rid of this and isolate the x. So final answer would be negative 5. Again, the two roots for this quadratic equation are 6 and negative 5. And let's check the answer. So here I will substitute the negative 5. Negative 5 to the power 2 minus negative 5 minus 30. So it will be 25 plus 5 minus 30. 30 minus 30 is equal to 0. Perfect. So we are on the right track. Last example. Okay, let's continue with another example. Here we have x squared minus 26 plus minus 20x plus 36. So we are looking for two numbers, which we add them, we get negative 20, and if we multiply them, we get 36. So let's see. The two numbers added negative 18. So I would say 18, negative 20, 18, and 20. Both with a negative sign, because if they are multiplied, then the resultant would be a positive number. And before I forget, the coefficient of x squared is also plus 1, so I'm good to use this method. So now I found the two numbers, I can simply factorize. So it will be factorized into x minus 18 times x minus 2 equal to 0. So a times b is equal to 0. That means either a is 0 or b is 0. If a is 0, that means x minus 18 is equal to 0. So I add plus 18 to both sides to isolate the x. X is 18. Here b is 0, so that means x minus 2 is 0. So I add plus 2 to both sides. So x would become positive 2. Okay, another example. X squared minus 10x plus 21 equal to 0. First, we have to check is the coefficient of x squared 1. And yes, so it satisfies the condition. Here, we are looking for two numbers, which we add them, we get negative 10, and we multiply them, we get 21. So I would say 7 and 3. And then both of them with a negative sign, and as you can see, if we multiply them, it would be 21. Then it will be factorized to x minus 7 multiplied by x minus 3. Again, that means a times b is equal to 0. So if a is 0, that means x minus 7 is 0. It's a linear equation. To isolate the x, we add plus 7 to both sides, so x is 7. Then here, if b is 0, that means x minus 3 is 0. I add plus 3 to both sides, so x would be plus 3. So as you can see, we have two roots for this quadratic equation. The last example, x squared plus 12x plus 20 is equal to 0. Here we have to first check the coefficient of x squared, is it 1 or not, and it is, so it satisfies the condition, and we are good to use this method. So we are looking for two numbers, if we add them we get 12, and if we multiply them we get 20. The two numbers would be 10 and 2, 10 and 2. Yeah, so if I want to rewrite it, that would be x plus 10 multiplied by x plus 2 is 0. So that means a times b is equal to 0, which means either a is 0 or b is 0. In order to solve this, x plus 10 is equal to 0, which is a linear equation. If we want to solve it, we add negative 10 to both sides to isolate the x. So the x would be negative 10. For the second one, if b is 0, that means x plus 2 would be 0. So I add negative 2 to both sides. So x would be negative 2. And as you can see, for this quadratic equation, we end up with having two roots or answer. And as always, if you substitute it back in the equation, it will be equal to 0. Let's check the answer. This time I'll use negative 10. So here, negative 10 sorry, to the power 2 is 100 plus 12 times negative 10, which is negative 120. Then here plus 20. So let's add it up together. 100 minus 120 is negative 20 plus 20, so the answer is 0, which is exactly equal to 0. So that means the roots are correct. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please don't forget to subscribe to this channel. See you next time.